All right, welcome to the Mission 43 podcast. I'm Brian Von Herbulis, and today we're bringing the newest member of our Mission 43 leadership team into the studio here to talk about his experiences growing up here in Boise, moving into a military life, and then some things that transpired during that time in the military, and what you're doing now. So welcome, Dan Nelson, to the Mission 43 team. We're glad to have you on board as the new director of 43 Inc.
Dude, you guys are definitely scraping the bottom of the barrel, obviously, but between like the scarecrow outside and me, I really am happy to be here. I'm honored.
Yeah, well, we appreciate what you bring to the team, and I want to spend some time just talking a little bit about you, your past, and what some of the initiatives are that you're going to actually work on with the Mission 43 team, man, and bring to our community. So you grew up playing high school football here in Boise at Centennial High, is that right?
That's right, man. Go Patriots. Yeah, no, I didn't actually grow up here. I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was born in Sicily. My dad was a Navy guy after Vietnam, and ended up going to high school here, and this is definitely still home. It was like a once-in-a-lifetime experience for me, especially transferring from like a place like Albuquerque to a place like Boise. And at that time, Boise was a lot smaller. I remember my dad did it right because when we first moved here to Idaho, the first thing he did was take me fishing on the Boise River, right at the Eagle Bridge, actually, which is now like, you know, like major like urban hub. Back then it wasn't, and I remember distinctly with my little Mepps lure seeing a rainbow trout come snag it in the water, and I'd never had that in my entire life, and Idaho got me.
Yeah, so you were living that true Idaho lifestyle as a young high school kid, man. That's good.
Yeah.
So, so you played football, big jock, and then something drew you to the military. You said your dad was in the military, and so what was your inspiration to join in the service, and what service did you join?
So, well, first off, my dad was in the military. He was a pilot in Vietnam. His dad was in the Navy. My mom's dad was in World War II as well. But really, it was not touted in my family as like military history. I was never pressured to be in the military. In fact, it was quite the opposite. I was the kid that wasn't allowed to have G.I. Joes, no toy guns. My mom was an anti-war protester when my dad was in Vietnam.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was not like certainly my parents' influence, but they still did influence it, just not intentionally, because their emphasis on service and being a part of a community, being a part of a nation, and actually being an active participant in that kind of unwittingly shaped my future. And you know, I had some offers, like as far as scholarship offers out of high school. I wasn't like the best, certainly athlete or anything like that, but I was lucky in the sports that I played in high school. But thank God I did not take any of those offers to go play because I was not ready for college. I was an idiot. Like, I think my GPA at Centennial High School, and I really regret to say this, I hope my sons never hear this, but I had a 2.0 GPA graduating high school. And I think I put as little effort into academics as I possibly could. Like, I went out of my way to be bad at school. And I was spoiled, not by my parents, but I just, you know, the nature of being in the position of being a football player, being a boxer, being, you know, a rugby player, and having good friends around me, I got to thinking that I was probably more special than I was. And then I joined the Marine Corps, and that pretty much quickly crushed that thought. I enlisted before 9/11 with a group of guys from Centennial High School, guys like Dan Magida, Bart McCarroll, all the McCarroll brothers actually, Justin Allensworth. Anyway, all these guys, we all went to boot camp together. And that was a formative experience for me because I thought I was the tough dude. I thought I was the guy that had already been in more fights than everybody else my age, and, you know, done stupid stuff and could drink my weight in beer and all these stupid immature thoughts that come with that. And boot camp was eye-opening for me in ways that it shouldn't have been, because it really showed me that I was not as mentally tough as I ever thought I was.
So in a really kind of strange way, it helped shape you at that early transformative age to recognize the person you were and areas where you certainly had some room for improvement.
Well, boot camp itself did that, but what did that mostly was my formative failure after that.
Okay.
So Marine Corps boot camp, obviously, you know, you get the tattoo. I have the boot camp scar. old Semper Fidelis and all that stuff. And I truly believed like I was going to be like Super Marine. I was going to SOI, School of Infantry. I was going to be the best 0311 that anyone had ever seen in the Marine Corps, and Chesty Puller was going to be singing songs about me. Then I got hurt, and it wasn't a big like injury at all. Like I hurt my back and bulged some discs and everything like that, and I got put in this thing called the Medical Rehab Battalion. And I don't even think they exist, or they're like renamed now or rebranded. But at that time, as an 18-year-old idiot, I started acting up, and I started getting in trouble and doing all the things that basically, you know, a junior enlisted Marine should not do. And as unbelievable as it sounds, the company commander called my parents here in Idaho. And so when I got summoned to the company commander's office as like, you know, an E2, he might as well have been God to me, but then I walk in there and God is sitting there with my parents.
Oh man.
Yeah, in Camp Pendleton, you know what I mean? And I'm like, mind is blown. And that dude, I don't even remember his name, I remember exactly what he looks like. Some random captain, company commander, and he laid it all out for me. Now mind you, September 11th had happened at this time.
Okay.
So things were shifting, but like Iraq wasn't even on the map yet, and Afghanistan was still pretty small scale. You know, it was like, so I think the drive to have guys and you know, maintain was probably not certainly not what it was even like by 2005, 2007 and beyond. So this company commander, he, with my parents, basically laid it all out and all the things that I've been doing wrong. And he said, do you want to be here? And laid it all out and said, you've been a really good Marine so far, and then you had this horrible downturn, and you've been acting like a total douchebag. Like, do you want to rectify that and become what a Marine should be, or do you want to quit? And I said, I want to quit.
Wow.
And my parents, even though they tried to talk me out of enlisting in the Marine Corps, at that time, they're like, you know, 18-year-old Dan, like you're ruining, this is going to have significant impacts, negative ones on your life. And they tried to talk me into staying, which is crazy, if you know my parents. And I didn't. I was totally sold on it, and I quit. So then I became this kind of, you know, 19-year-old lost soul that came crawling with my tail between my legs back to Boise, Idaho. While meanwhile, all the guys that I joined with from my like high school football team did the right things and went off to their advanced schools and went to their units and become young Marines in the fleet, right? And I was home. So continued down a negative path, getting in trouble, doing stupid stuff. And luckily, high school coach, Lee Newman, at Centennial High School, my former football coach, was like, hey, you should consider coming here and being an assistant coach. Granted, I'm 19, and I'm like coaching, you know, 18 and 17-year-olds.
Guys a year younger than you.
Right, so the school, that school, Centennial High School, gave me the opportunity not just to be an assistant coach, but they also allowed me to be the in-school suspension like specialist, which is kind of like a teacher minus, where you just like run the in-school suspension, which is really ironic because like 2 years before that, I was in there.
Every day.
Yeah, I was the one in there.
Yeah.
And now I'm supposed to be in charge of these people. But I think of the leap of faith that they had in me at that time. They're like, hey, like we trust you to actually be an adult, even if you're not.
Yeah.
You know what
Well, they gave you purpose, and they gave you something meaningful to apply some new character traits maybe that they knew they could draw out of you if they gave you some responsibility.
Right. And from that, like initial glimpse of purpose, I continued to rehab from like the physical injury, and the coaches and mentors and whatever you want to call them, the adults in my life, were like, hey, you need to go to college. Like, you're not going to be here assistant coaching forever. You need to go to college, you need to get your shit together, and you should go play football because that's a passion of yours, and you were really good at it when you did, or at least reasonably good at it, even though I was a crappy athlete. So I did that, and again, just another random coach, Bob O'Mara, who used to be like a Meridian legend back in like, I don't want to like make him sound older than he is, but a long time ago.
Yeah, yeah.
And then he became the head coach at some junior colleges around the country. He was at this junior college called Arizona Western in the Yuma, Arizona, the jewel of...
Oh, beautiful place.
So I went down there and got really lucky. I played one season at Arizona Western under Coach O'Mara, and it worked out for the team and it worked out for me personally, because after that season and my grades, which magically went from a 2.0 in high school to a 4.0, it's amazing what that crushing formative failure of my Marine Corps experience did for me, because it was like, hey, like, this is important, and like you only have so many, fuck ups like allowed in your life.
Yeah, but that's such a great storyline right there, though. The fact that you recognized the mistakes you made, the errors in your way. You failed, but you failed fast. You made corrective moves in your life to become a better person that was going to thrive.
I don't know if I was at the better person stage that yet, honestly, and I'm not sure if you ever like can make up for like really serious like flaws and mistakes you've made in your life. But especially at that point, because I'm like 21, being given the opportunity to go play football at a D1 school and get a paid for education was all of a sudden possible. And I became like a monk. Like all I cared about was getting a scholarship. Like I quit drinking. I changed everything. I joined I acted in stage theater at my junior college just because they told me like, hey, make yourself marketable to the biggest schools, the most interesting, so do whatever. Like join clubs.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing I don't really want to get into, but yes, I had a brief stage theater acting career in a junior college.
All right, that's fantastic.
Yeah, the Rocky Horror Picture Show, man.
Do you have film of that somewhere?
No, it's been destroyed, I think,
okay,
most of it. But I still have the Golden Speedo.
All right.
Break it out every now and then.
Yeah, we got to see that.
Yeah. But the other thing that was going on was like this crushing guilt, because that was 2003. So when I was in my first year and having all this kind of newfound success, and like in working hard and seeing tangible like benefits from that and doing the right things, all my buddies were going to Iraq in the initial invasion and Afghanistan and everything else.
Okay, so you get this scholarship opportunity to go play D1 football at UCLA. So not a small football program by any means, and elevated to captain of the football team. So talk a little bit about that time and your responsibilities and what that experience was like for you playing D1 football at that level.
The highest highs and definitely a lot of lows too. Again, some formative things, like my very first game as a D1 player, I was a sophomore. And I got to start. We played Oklahoma State in the Rose Bowl. That was my first college football game experience. And I remember, like, actually before like a particular play, like I just heard this like buzzing noise, and I'm like, what is that? And I'm usually kind of a focused guy when I'm in that situation, like actually playing a game.
Yeah.
But I was distracted by this buzzing noise, and it was the vibration of the crowd noise in my face mask.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I had just like things I'd never experienced before, that, honestly kind of shook me. I think like I was like, yeah, cool, I'm calm under pressure. I know how to play in big games, but I was shook for sure. And I thought I was pretty proud about my performance that game. And then the next morning, my 91-year-old grandma, who lived in Los Angeles and followed sports devoutly, called me and was like, hey, I'm really sorry what they wrote about you in the LA Times. And I'm like,
ouch.
Oh. And so I like immediately like opened it up, and it was like, hey, the coaches say Dan Nelson, the new junior college transfer, did not play well. And I'm like, oh,
Crushing.
It's a different game. It's not like it was a bunch of different aspects, but you realize that like the coaches in those types of programs, like they're really great coaches, throughout football period, professional, college, big and small, high school, everything. But when it becomes professional coaching at that level, like that's their livelihood.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So you lose
Big money.
games.
Yeah.
You lose games. You're going to move your family. It's like the military, like
Right.
only less stable, and you don't know where your paycheck's going to come from.
Yeah, and it's a big money game.
It's a lot of stress, man.
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, I absolutely freaking loved it. I was the weirdo that loved practice. I loved training. I loved the off-season workouts. I loved the early mornings. I loved the late nights in the film room. And I loved my teammates. And that like filled a void for me of like being in a leadership role and being comfortable in that role. So it was extremely helpful because super diverse team, guys from everywhere. And I'm the white, unathletic guy from Idaho. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
That was older too, compared to like my classmates. So a lot of different experiences all kind of wrapped into one. Meanwhile, in the background, Iraq's heating up. I mean, it was on. Afghanistan starts heating up, and Pat Tillman got killed.
Yeah.
And Pat Tillman was like my idol as a high school kid here because the connection, like I watched him at Arizona State, primarily because Jake Plummer, who's from here, Capitol High School graduate, was their quarterback, and he was like the local celebrity here as a college athlete at Arizona State University. And then saw this like random wild man on special teams and defense. That was Pat Tillman, and I'm like, dude, that's me, because like that's exactly what I wanted to personify. Like I was a special teams dude. I was a team guy first. I wanted to be all the things that Pat represented just from watching him. You know what I mean? Thousands of miles away. And so his decision after 9/11 to enlist with his brother and become a Ranger, serve in Ranger Regiment, and deploy to Iraq and Afghanistan really touched a lot of spots. And then I remember my first year at UCLA is when he was killed in Afghanistan.
Okay.
Coupled with that, you know, you have some of my friends in like Dan Magida, who I'm still close with here today, but he got injured in Iraq in 2005. You know, while I'm living the life and enjoying all the fruits that come with being, you know, ball player at school, you know.
Yeah, right.
Getting the GPA that I always wanted, like 3.5, 4.0, successful in school, successful in football. I mean, certainly not any kind of like star or anything, but there was something that was eating at me, and that kind of led into the next chapter.
All right. So all those influencers primed you towards coming back around to military service again.
Yeah.
So let's just dive right into that. What happened?
Pat Tillman's family started the Pat Tillman Foundation.
Right.
And in its infancy, and I think at that time it was run by Alex Garwood, was his Pat Tillman's brother-in-law. And I was like, I need to do something. So I ended up shattering my collarbone in the 9th game of the season against Stanford one year. And I had some time on my hands because I was going to miss spring ball as this recovered. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to start doing something totally out of my wheelhouse. I'm going to start running marathons. I'm going to do an ultra marathon and triathlons in the off season. And I was still built like a, you know, college football player, because that's what was literally like paying my bills at the time and paying for my education. So I had to maintain that and get into this whole new mode of training. So I started doing fundraising by running marathons, triathlons, and ultra marathons for the Pat Tillman Foundation through that. And papers picked it up. There was an article about me, this random football player dude that was doing these random races, trying to raise money for a really good cause. And that led to an email from an Army Lieutenant Colonel named Sean Buck, who said, hey, I run the ROTC department here at UCLA. I think we should come in and talk. And I said, I don't think you know my history, you know, and but I went in there, I was completely honest with him, laid everything that happened in my Marine Corps experience on the table, and told him that after I graduated, I was planning on enlisting in the Army as an 18 X-ray because I wanted to be a Green Beret. And he said, I think you can be more than that. I think you should be a leader. And I was like, well, there's all this stuff, you know, like my failure in the Marine Corps as a junior enlisted guy, and now you're telling me I should become an officer. And he said, everything you've done since that point has shown me that you have basically learned the lesson from your formative idiot screw up.
Yeah, right.
And it could be a positive thing. So let's try it out. So I basically did like a year and a half of ROTC while playing football, which was a big like exercise and time management because, you know, both of those things are time intensive, not to mention just the academic rigors of being a student in college. And it worked out really well, and that gave me a whole newfound purpose. And as it didn't take long for me to figure out that that was a calling. Like I knew that even though I enjoyed college life, I loved football, I loved my team, I felt like what I was about to do next was what all of that was preparing me for.
Yeah, it takes that team dynamic to a whole new level. Yeah. And okay, so did you graduate from UCLA? And then,
I did.
Okay, so you completed your college, your curriculum there, and graduate from UCLA.
Yep.
And then you're entering into the Army as a second lieutenant.
Yep, brand new second lieutenant, get to go to the School for Wayward Boys at Fort Benning.
Yeah.
You know, the whole path, the basic officer leader course, infantry officer basic course, airborne school, and ranger school, because I was lucky to be selected as an infantry officer.
That's a fun run right there, though.
Yeah.
A lot of school, but a fun run.
Dude, it was amazing. And
Yeah.
like the guys that I got to work with coming from all different backgrounds, you know, West Point, guard guys, dudes that were like me that were college athletes of some kind that wanted to do this, and then also like a dude that was a professor at MIT, and I shit you not. He was a professor at MIT, and then after of Iranian descent, by the way. After 9/11, he's like, you know what? I want to do more, so I'm going to join the Army and become an infantry officer. And this dude looked and was built like an MIT professor. I don't know.
Right.
Like stereotypical. And this poor dude was like around a bunch of idiots that just got out of college and are now being paid like a reasonable sum of money with too much time on their hands.
Yeah, having a good time.
Yeah, and shooting lots of guns.
Yeah.
And learning everything warfare. So
yeah, jumping out of airplanes and
exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was so diverse that, and it was a special time because everyone knew exactly where we were going. Because like that was the beginning of the surge in Iraq. Afghanistan was getting cracking again. Like everyone knew as young infantry officers what we were asking to be sent into. And for me, at the end of that pipeline, it very quickly came true.
Okay.
I was assigned to 3rd Brigade, 82nd Airborne, 2505, 2 Panther. So, you know, I was super proud to be paratrooper with my maroon beret and everything. And my unit had already gone to Iraq. They were in Sadr City in East Baghdad area, and I joined them there.
Okay. Wow, man.
Yeah.
So what was your experience like in Iraq?
Extremely frustrating. Extremely frustrating.
Yeah.
I think, you know, especially at that time in that area, EFPs were a thing.
Right.
So all of the casualties and all the guys that the battalion and brigade and company lost were all from EFPs. And that's something, they're explosively formed projectiles. So picture like IEDs that are just molten lava that can penetrate even our thickest armored vehicles. And it's an unpleasant game to play when you're not seeing results of like, you know, raids and everything where you actually get to tangibly see results. And it sounds terrible, but you know, if you capture or kill somebody, that is a result.
Absolutely.
And versus driving around or hitting dry holes and then all of a sudden, like the turret of an MRAP just gets destroyed and whoever's inside is unfortunately gone.
Yeah, I think that that sentiment of frustration from that time period in Iraq is pretty common. A lot of people sense that same level of frustration that I've talked to from being there in that time period. So coming home from that deployment, what'd you do next?
I got divorced.
Okay.
And kind of went into my now like senior lieutenant. Okay, I have my combat experience phase of trying to figure out what was next. And part of that trip too is I got to see SF dudes, 75th Ranger Regiment dudes, and SEALs come in and destroy targets within my AO.
Yeah, right.
You know, like my AO. Like you're assigned this little swath of land as a platoon leader, and it's like, hey, make sure everything stays straight here.
Yeah.
It's a lot to ask, not just like from me, but like from 18-year-old paratroopers that signed up to, you know, for whatever the reason.
Right.
And now they're asking, like, being asked to govern, which is interesting. And those dudes, the special dudes, the soft dudes, special operations forces dudes, would not all the time, but sometimes come in, break everything. I remember one in particular dude who I have no idea even what he was. I'm just going to say he was a SEAL, but I certainly don't know any rank or anything. He had a really cool beard. He had super non-standard cool guy uniform. And I remember like coming up because we were like assigned to do outer cordon or whatever, you know, as they did cool shit inside. And he comes out and he's like, hey, are you in charge? I'm like, yeah. You know, and like wearing my knee pads and everything because it was the 82nd, man. You
wore
do
all
what
your
you're told,
kit.
yeah. And he's like, yeah, we broke a bunch of stuff and my dog bit a bunch of people in there, so thanks.
Apologize.
And like hop in the strikers and go back to BIOP where they're, you know, probably drinking beers like 3 hours later, and they leave us with this freaking mess.
Yeah,
and
right.
like, and they're like, yeah, pay those people because we broke down their door and killed their whatever. And I'm like, oh, not cool. And I was like, one, I want to be that, but two, I never want to be that.
Yep.
I will never be that guy that treats conventional forces different because you know what? Like, just because you're wearing a baseball cap and like have a beard, like my guys are being shot at and blown up too.
Oh, absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, we don't get to go back to a cool team house afterwards. We live in this shithole.
No, nothing more pure than those raw infantrymen out there doing the deed for long days, long hours, and truthfully, you know, in a lot of instances, getting into firefights on a daily basis. They didn't get to just helicopter in and bang a target. They lived on that ground and chewed that dirt all the time, man. I have the utmost respect for those dirty, hard infantrymen that live that grit every day.
For sure, man. They are the backbone, and I don't know what it is about Americans. I think people assume it's human nature. Like, if you put someone in any kind of environment and then some entity attacks them, that they'll fight back. It's not true, man.
Yeah.
That is not universally human nature. But for whatever reason, like, not everybody, but if you take a group of like 17 to 20-year-old American kids and put them in whatever environment and you shoot at them, like, they're gonna shoot back.
Oh yeah.
Like, I don't know if it's a positive or a negative on our society or culture as a whole, but it's worth acknowledging that, like, the warrior culture that we foster in this country, or we have throughout its foundational, like, throughout its history, it exists and it is important.
Oh yeah, it's raw and it's important for sure. Okay, so come back from that deployment, you get divorced.
Yeah.
You have a vision of what you want to become. So what was the pathway to Special Forces?
I guess I joined knowing that I wanted to be in an airborne unit. I checked that block. I had my 82nd experience, which was a really good place to grow up because you learn, really what right looks like. And
Yeah.
I had some amazing leaders. Colonel Marcus Evans was my battalion commander for a while. He's now the JSOC commander, and he bounced between, all the special units, but specifically, Ranger Regiment, SMU stuff, and then did some conventional time. And I was lucky enough to be, graced with his leadership because honestly, he was at that time like the best Army officer I'd ever met, like, period. So I decided I want to do something, special, and I was lucky enough to be afforded the opportunity to go to SFAS, Special Forces Assessment and Selection. Was lucky there, and then was also really lucky throughout the Q course. And I don't know, I guess, like, it's not something that I planned as a kid. Like, I didn't grow up being like, hey, I want to be a Green Beret.
Yeah.
But once I was in there and saw the meaning, like in Iraq, for instance, and it's going to sound really shitty, but if we're going to put ourselves in harm's way, and I was thinking like this selfishly, so if I'm going to put my platoon dudes in harm's way, and then we end up, having to kill like the 16-year-old kid because he's clicking a garage door opener to blow up an EFP, like, yes, that is combat, and yes, it is justified because he's trying to kill you. But I would like to be a part of a group that goes after more important people than basically it's like, the kid that's just the same as the kids in like South Central Los Angeles that are just doing the stupid shit they're doing, not for any ideological purpose, but, just because they want a status or money or to be a part of the cool kid club.
Yep. Okay, so let's fast forward a little bit to your deployment as a team commander in an ODA in 2017. So you were with 19th Special Forces Group at the time?
Yep. Transitioned and went to 19th SF Group. I was in 1st Battalion, and we actually went. We were the outsiders of the outsiders. So 2 1st Battalion teams got attached to a 5th Battalion AOB or Special Forces Company.
Yep.
That was attached to a 7th Group, 7th Special Forces Group SOTF. So we were the outsiders to the outsiders to the outsiders.
I've been there.
Yep.
Yeah, it's not a comfortable place to be.
Right. Luckily, though, the 7th Group leadership that we had, there was a lot of overlap, and a lot of, like, my peers that were in staff positions there were guys that I had been through Ranger School with, through the Q course with. So, it's a small community. And reputation is pretty much the finest form of currency that you have in that community.
Oh, absolutely.
So it worked out to where we were, we had a change of mission right before we left in April 2017 to go to Afghanistan. We were originally, scheduled to do basically the same type of anti-Taliban type missions, period of darkness missions, where on an average 6-month trip, you're lucky to, if it's a good trip, you're going to get out like probably 5 or 6 times on successful POD missions, period of darkness missions.
Yeah.
That changed in about like 12 hours. So pretty much as we're like getting on the bird, they're like, hey, your team and a couple other teams are going to be briefed on like a change of mission specifically for you guys. It's all like comes from big picture stuff. At that point, President Trump had just assumed office pretty much. It was in his first year.
Uh-huh.
And the guidance at the time was to annihilate ISIS. And
All right.
yeah, so I mean, it sounds cool, but at the same time, and I'm not trying to like sound like super douchey officer here, but annihilate is not a tactical task.
No, not at all.
So like things like destroy, defeat, deny, those things mean something to me. Like I understand what they actually want me to do with it, but annihilate is pretty damn broad. And a lot of people don't know this, but there is an area controlled by ISIS in Afghanistan. If you ever heard of ISIS Khorasan province or ISIS-K, Khorasan province is basically this ungoverned area in southern Nangarhar, which is in Afghanistan, along the border with Pakistan.
Right.
So they made that ISIS made that their default fallback position because they knew strategically they were going to lose Mosul, they were going to lose northern Iraq, and they were going to lose Syria eventually as well. So their fallback position.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about that is when we were given that mission, it was basically like an SF guy's dream, I think, or like any kind of like soft dude's dream where it's like, we don't have any answers for you. We know it's really bad, but like go there and stay there and clear this valley. These valleys are like the size of the Treasure Valley.
Yeah, they're huge.
They're like brigade size
Yeah.
objectives. And you're going with, I had an 11-man SF team, 1 Air Force combat controller, and then like a small infantry uplift attachment. And then, you know, a company of commandos, Afghan commandos, and hijinks ensued. So it was really unique because when we first got there, it was like, hey, go down there for 5 days.
Yeah.
Like we're literally flying in. We didn't even have all our equipment yet from unpalletized and everything. So it was like, just go down there and stay there for 5 days, don't lose any ground, and go from there. And it was really unique because that 5 days stretched until about 35 days where we only had what we had brought, you know, on our backs. And we fell in on like doing the RIP, which is, you know, relief in place of the team that had gotten to that point in the valley,
Yep.
and literally doing an inventory like while periodically being shot at. We stayed in RON sites, which are rest overnight sites, and I have to give credit to the team leader before me because he named that particular RON site Ron Artest. I don't know if you're familiar with Ron Artest, but he's like the NBA guy,
yeah,
and he
right.
changed his name to Meta World Peace.
Perfect.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
Ron site, Meta World Peace, and it was like the least peaceful place in the entire country, let alone
Yeah,
probably
a little
high up there
ironic.
for like the most violent places in the world at that point.
Right. Yeah.
The other unique thing about that trip is the ISIS fighters we were fighting were not Afghan, and most of them were not even from Pakistan. It was a deployment for us, and it was a deployment for those douchebags. They came from all kinds of places, speaking all kinds of languages,
Right.
specifically to get it, like, to fight and kill Americans. And we were there for the same thing. It was unique for me in my experience in deployments because I never had in like our counterinsurgency environment an opportunity to actually do like legit force-on-force battle, like for long duration,
Right.
talking months at a time, where it's just your team and your partner force commandos taking and holding ground from a really determined enemy that traveled a long way to kill you.
Yeah. So you're on the ground there with your partner force. You had Afghan commandos partnered with you. So how long at this point are you on the ground where things start to really heat up and you and your team find yourself in the ultimate shit sandwich that led to casualties, some teammates killed in action, you
Yeah.
being wounded? I mean, let's walk that dog through that situation that ultimately landed you and many of your teammates back at Walter Reed. And so what happened that day?
That was in August. So in August, we were asked to go down an adjacent valley because we were successful in clearing the valley we were assigned to. Started about like 5 in the morning, let's say, on August 16th. We were in basically constant contact until about 5 p.m. And we started receiving really accurate and bracketed indirect fire, like mortar fire and rocket fire. So people don't know what bracketing is. Like they shoot long, and if you're standing here, they shoot over your head, and then they shoot in front of you,
Yep.
and over your head and in front of you until they get closer and closer. And it was getting remarkably close, and they were zeroing in our position. And, you know, it's hard to kind of describe, but like if I just objectively, I was the ground force commander for all friendly forces in that entire valley at the time. I made a decision to occupy this one reinforced concrete structure that was available to us at the time. It was an abandoned mosque. There were no civilians anywhere. And we occupied that mosque, we cleared that mosque. This concrete reinforced building. We were there for about 20 minutes, and then there was a massive explosion. So 31 Americans were injured, and my teammate, the youngest guy on the team, Aaron Butler, who's from Utah, was killed. And it's one of those things that, like, well, it started, that massive explosion started a U-shaped ambush as well, where estimated around 200 ISIS fighters were basically making an attempt to overrun us because we were in a very vulnerable position after taking that number of casualties and the extent that we did.
Yeah, you got a mass casualty situation on your
Yeah.
hands and an ambush because they recognize your
Right.
vulnerability. Okay,
Right.
got it.
So objectively, you know, it's like, the fact is that I led my guys into a trap. And that had catastrophic consequences for a lot of us. But extremely proud of my team's performance after that fact. You know, it is what it is. Like, none of the guys are boastful guys that want recognition for something that's based on tragedy. But from that day, that incident, 3 of my guys received the Silver Star, and my Air Force CCT, Dan Keller, received the Air Force Cross. And honestly, there's a lot more guys, and I'm not even talking about the other guys that got BSMVs for their actions after the explosion. But there was a lot of remarkable heroics from a lot of guys, our infantry uplift guys, the team guys, and some of the commandos as well. And I think that, well, it did physically break me. It injured my brain to the extent where, you know, I wasn't me anymore. In addition to a bunch of other polytrauma injuries, just getting thrown around. And, like, the fact is, like, anyone in the center of the building, it was me, Aaron Butler, and then a couple of our Afghan partner force when the explosion happened. I ended up kind of waking up halfway out of the one corner-fed door of the building when I woke up. And, you know, everyone else in that vicinity that I was around died. So, you know, it's one of those weird things. It's probably stranger than fiction. I have no idea why. It's certainly not fair, but it is what it is. Everyone else died in that particular location. Other guys that were further away were spattered with, you know, shrapnel of all different types and brain injuries as well because of the extent of the explosion. But, you know, I came out. So, mass casualty, medevaced all the people we could. We maxed out all the birds when they finally got in there. A handful of us with a couple trucks that we had ended up walking out because the rest of the wounded were loaded onto the trucks. So we walked about 12K back to where we started that morning, and not really proud about that fact either because, you know, we pushed further than, you know, anyone had been in that area, and then, you know, within less than 24 hours we ended up walking out. Yeah. But from there, my team got split up all over the country of Afghanistan because Jalalabad, even though it was the closest place, didn't have space, like bed space, for all the number of casualties that we had, because I'm not even counting all the Afghan casualties that we had. Yeah. So me and a group got put on a fixed-wing bird, I know, and sent to Kandahar Medical Facility. We had some guys sent to Bagram, and some guys stayed at J-Bad. Things are really hazy for me there, so it's hard for me to, like, give you exact details and timelines.
Yep, got it.
But that happened August 16th, so, like, by the time, you know, I even got out of the valley, it was already August 17th. And then by, I think, late August, I ended up at Walter Reed after going through Germany and everything like that.
Yep.
And that was a really challenging thing for me because I felt like I had been tricked, because I was at a point where I had no freaking idea how I even was, how I sounded, how my speech was affected, and people couldn't really understand me. It sounds ridiculous, but I had no idea how fucked up I actually was.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So you're there, your team, most of them, in fact all of them, experienced some form of injury, and you're there not in a clear frame of mind, you know, significant traumatic brain injury and other physical injuries, and trying to make heads or tails of where you are in life at this point.
Yeah.
At that point, you were married again, right?
Yes, thank God. Yeah.
Yeah, so pretty amazing wife that I have the pleasure of knowing, and she was a tremendous asset to you at that point, really helping you get through some of the toughest times in your life, which, you know, we'll call recovery, but there were some ups and downs in that road for you. So
yeah.
Casey is amazing, and I hope to get her in here and let her tell her story. But let's talk a little bit about your path to recovery and the ups and downs, the highs and lows of that, and then finding yourself back here and landing back in Idaho and getting involved in Mission 43. So let's walk that now.
Yeah. Casey is a freaking G, man. Like,
yeah,
first of
great.
all, yeah. And just to give perspective, she was 8.5 months pregnant with our second son, and our first son was 1 year old when I got injured. So she lied to the airlines about how far along she was with her pregnancy, got on the bird and flew to Walter Reed in late August, and with a 1 year old, and basically 9 months pregnant. She had our second son, Leroy, floor beneath where I was in the brain injury ward at Walter Reed. Like, she lived in a hotel and then an apartment provided by us by the SOCOM Care Coalition by herself, essentially, and then her mom came to help, and her mom is an angel too. But like, yeah, man, like, that's not normal, and I can only imagine the stress that put on her and even my young sons, you know? So get that out of the way. My experience at Walter Reed was generally terrible. And I'm not saying all the clinicians and people there were terrible, because I know that's not true. I will put the blame on myself, because
you were in a bad state.
I had no concept. And when I got my cell phone, for instance, the one thing I remember doing, because I have the bank statements to prove it, is I ordered like all this shit from all these tactical outlets that I wanted for the next trip. I was convinced, I guess, that I was going back, and I just needed, you know, like after every trip, you're like, oh, that dude had this belt, that was way easier.
Planning.
Yep. So it's like, get these things on my list so I can get back to work. I had no concept of how things actually were, probably until I got home here. So I think that was January. I got home to Idaho on this program, so I'm still like active duty.
January of 2018.
Of 18, yeah.
Okay.
So it's like, okay, the DOD says, hey, you're like hurting, you're gonna go do what we call community care and live at home and get care from the VA or other providers and everything while your care team is still at Fort Carson, Colorado. And in theory, it sounds really good, and I'm happy. All I wanted to do was get home. I'm like, if I can just get home, then I can recover and then get ready for the next trip and get back to work. Didn't work out that well for me, because when I came home, you know, in a hospital type environment, it's really easy. Everyone kind of holds your hand. Everything's really canned, you know. You're not making up your own schedule. You're not responsible for shit. And I come home and have like a newborn baby. My wife's going back to work because she's a mechanical engineer. You know, a 1.5-year-old at that point, like all this shit. And I'm in this tiny house in Boise, Idaho, and I'm like, you know,
You're like a caged animal in there.
Yeah, I'm basically the third child for my wife to take care of at that point, which is like horrible and crushing, because in my mind, like, my ego, my mind, my physicality, like everything I was, you know, like an SF dude that was doing a really unique deployment, even in the SOF community, with really great results. It was the best deployment of my life. I feel like everything had led me to that point in my career and life. And then it ended. And now I'm the guy that can't be trusted to close a garage door, to turn off the stove, or to independently look after my kids, and certainly drive my kids anywhere. And that's where I was at. So, I mean, you name it, man. Like, I turned to all the wrong things. Like the opioids were a big thing for pain management, which was legit. But there's all different types of pain I was trying to manage. And it became really, it became a lot, man. It's like one of those things where you used to be like, oh yeah, I don't touch the opioids or anything because they make me feel sick, right? That's how I used to feel. That's like the old Dan. And then you realize after, like, you know, you take one oxycodone pill and then you switch it to 2, but hey, it's only in the evening when I'm trying to knock myself out. And then it's like, well, okay, now it's in the afternoon, but I can't do it in the morning because I still have to like function and everything. but now I'm doing it in the morning too. And then it becomes like, man, I can actually function a lot better with this in the morning.
Right.
So just like next thing you know, like my former like occasional 1 pill, 2 pills, 4 pills turn into like 10 to 12. And I'm like, wow, you know, and that affects a lot of things, and it affects certainly my personality or whatever personality I had at that time. And, you know, Casey's not one for ultimatums, but, you know, like a year later, it was like January of 19, I guess.
Right, yeah.
She was like, hey, like, go to the cabin in McCall and unfuck this. Like, you need some separation. And she wasn't saying like, you know, you have to do this or we're leaving, but it's not working out.
But you were essentially addicted to the opioids you were taking at that point.
Yeah, for sure. And other things too, you know. You know, alcohol certainly was a crutch that, you know, that I still lean on, you know. Right. So it's not like everything, but, you know, I had some really good fortune to have some good docs and counselors that it wasn't their first rodeo, and they're like, dude, what is going to kill you first? You know,
because
like,
you're on the path.
Yeah. Like, is it going to be like, are you going to be the opioid dude? Is it going to be yourself? You know, like, are you going to kill yourself, or like intentionally, or are you just going to slowly do it with alcohol? And, you know, it's still a work in progress, but yeah, like that actually made sense to me. I think looking at things from that perspective, you know, kind of reminded me of, you know, operational planning. Yeah. You know, it's like, what is going to kill me and my guys, and what has the potential to hurt my guys, or, you know, whatever, the most. Let's get rid of that first. And it's kind of what I've been doing, working on.
So you've been working on that for a long time. How did you kick that addiction? What steps did you go through? Did you just reach down, grab a hold, and say, I got to fix myself?
Do not recommend the path I tried because, yes, essentially it was cold turkey. Again, during that whole time, it's embarrassing to say, but like I didn't care about my recovery. Like, it was harder for me to say like, hey, my speech was really affected, right? Mm-hmm. So I never had a stuttering problem in my life, but then it went from like just like this weird jumbled stutter to like a really pronounced stutter to repeating words even when I write. And you know, I'd always been a good writer as well. Like I always enjoyed all that stuff, and reading. I enjoyed reading, but my eyes couldn't track very well. So I'm rereading things, and then you forget all this shit, the little shit, tying a fly onto tippet. Like all these things I couldn't do anymore, or when I did try to do them, it just caused so much frustration that it's easier to say I'm gonna put that shit aside, and like this is the new me now, but the new me doesn't want to do any of the old me shit because it just points out how fucked up the new me is. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I got it.
So like people talk about isolation. Like I didn't like go to the mountains and like leave my family, but
you were in an isolated world.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. I was in my own world and focusing very hard on denying everything about my condition.
Okay, so what brought you out of that? What kind of treatment, what kind of support from friends kind of helped smack you in the face a little bit and draw you out of that? Was it Casey? Was it your group of close friends? Where was your support coming from?
Certainly Casey, because she was the constant case manager, even though she's not a social worker or case manager by trade.
Just a loving wife that jumped in and needed to help fix you.
I can't tell you how many people I've met now like her, because the husband or whatever, it could be reversed, the wife, whoever it is that's suffering is just like in their own world, and no matter what commercial they see that's like, hey, there's this cool program called Operation Mend or Warrior's Heart or whatever, people sending you links, they could send me all the links and give me all the pamphlets and tell me all this shit and offer cool fishing trips, and I didn't give a shit about that. Yeah. Everyone's like, hey man, you know, you're a wounded warrior, like I want to take you on this awesome hunting trip. I'm like, I like hunting, but no. I'm not interested in that. What I want to do is be fucking me again. Yep. I want to not stutter. I want to remember, you know, like the first year of my son's life again. Things like that. So what Casey did was constantly research opportunities and treatment modalities. And she would, oftentimes without asking me any permission, apply for those things. And even if she did ask me and I said no, or I showed no interest in it, half the time she would do it anyway. and then put it on the back burner. And soon as those little windows are so critical, where I gave her a tiny opportunity, like, okay, like, you know, late night, I'm like intoxicated for whatever, and she's like, hey, there's this like, you know, program, whatever. I'm like, yeah, maybe I'll think about it. She's like, boom, gotcha. You're thinking about it. Well, I already applied and everything's set up, and you know, I already set up childcare and everything. So you leave on Monday, whatever. And that same thing happened in 2019 with the hyperbarics, and that was the biggest game changer for me at all. So hyperbaric oxygen treatment or hyperbaric oxygen therapy, HBOT, is a kind of new and upcoming thing in our country, but every other major country in the world uses it to treat TBI, PTSD, I mean everything, cerebral palsy, and then the things that we use to treat it for here, like diabetic ulcers and things like that. So simple. All it is time, pressure, and oxygen. Like there's
doesn't get any easier than that.
Nope. You get put in like a dive chamber, which you're really familiar with. You get put on 100% oxygen, and they take you to a certain depth and leave you there for an hour, 2 hours, 90 minutes, whatever the course of the procedure is, and you do that over and over. So I did like 6 weeks of that, 2 dives a day, 5 days a week, plus 3 days of neurofeedback and other therapies at Idaho Hyperbarics in Pocatello. And yeah, Pocatello, Idaho, by the way.
Yeah.
That actually exists. So, and how I got there, Casey, of course, had already researched it and set everything up. And then this amazing organization called Task Force Dagger, that is chartered to help SOCOM guys and guys that are injured or their families of Gold Star families in the SOCOM community. They basically started like with Casey's encouragement, or I don't know, she probably propagated the whole damn thing, but there was like this campaign to get Dan into HBOT. So like I get like an email saying, hey Dan, like we want to pay for you to go to a month of HBOT in Pocatello.
Yep.
And I'm like, no, like ignore. And then they're like, hey, we want to do this. Like, I get the same email, and then I get a phone call, and then I get texts, and then other dudes in the community are calling me because they were propped up to by somebody like, hey, I did hyperbarics, and it really helped me out. So one of those, it just happened. I went down there not looking forward to it. I was super pissed, and I was not a really fun person to be around probably that first week. But the people down there were so kind, and like, it wasn't their first rodeo with dudes like me either.
People like you.
They're like, come on in, fucked up guy. Like, sit in the chamber, and like, we're not making any promises. Like, if you think this is snake oil, then whatever. But like, just sit here and marinate in it.
Yeah.
and then I think it was like probably the end of the second week where I started kind of putting myself through my own form of rec therapy, where like from 7 a.m. to about 3 p.m. I'm in the treatment process there, and then you're just in East Idaho. And I'm like, well, I'm gonna go fishing. I'm committed to every single day that I'm here. After my treatment is done, I'm going to take myself fishing, and I did. And the one thing that no doctor anywhere gives a shit about, that was like a game-changing moment for me, was I was able to tie like a small size fly onto fine tippet. And that's something that since the injury, I just didn't have that vision, that dexterity.
Your motor skills back again.
Yeah.
So you saw tangible
results. My
results.
dog is dreaming now too, if you hear him, sorry.
You saw tangible results from your HBOT.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
And it wasn't a silver bullet, like for sure. But what it did do is give me cognitive white space to actually focus on the treatments. Yeah. So even though there's like really good speech therapists here at the Boise VA, even though I have a really good counselor at the Boise VA, even though I have really great clinicians down in a program called Operation Mend at UCLA that are all helping me with all the injuries and stuff, right? But it was just an exercise in frustration before that for me, because it's one thing to go and say like, hey, I'm spending an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours per week working on X problem, but if you don't have the cognitive ability to step back and be like, okay, I need to prioritize this, and now I'm not going to be so pissed off about it that I get nothing out of it except for just constant frustration. And that's what it gave me. It gave me a little window, and of course, people like Casey and some of those clinicians pounced on that window. And for me, there was hope. That was the first time that I saw like glimpses of the old me, and I wanted to capitalize on that as well.
Yeah, I think we first met you just before that HBOT therapy that you went through, treatments you went through. It was right, I think, sometime in the winter of 2019.
Probably.
And I think we met you for the first time at one of our 43 Inc. sessions.
Yeah. I think it was a happy hour.
Okay.
It was a happy hour because Brian Madden, and that was a whole weird thing because Casey was reaching out to everybody for help, and in her reach out for help, she was referred to Ann Madden, Brian's wife. And then they connected, and so Casey's like, hey, you know, we're in Boise, my husband's this SF dude that got hurt and blah, blah, blah. And then Ann Madden was like, oh, my husband's a former 160th pilot, and he's here working Mission 43, blah, blah. Casey tells me, Ann tells Brian, and both of us were like, that guy's full of shit. So, because you know, there's
soft guys.
Yeah, I mean, there's like 6,000 Green Berets in the regiment, and I've met all 10,000 of them here in Boise, Idaho. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
Over the course of this past year.
All right, so you meet Brian Madden at this happy hour. You guys kind of get through the butt sniffing routine that most guys that serve in the military that hear somebody came from some special unit. You're gonna vet each other. So you guys do that, and then kind of what happened from there?
It gave me some hope, you know. I'm like, hey, like even in Boise, Idaho, there's dudes out there that actually have the same circle of friends, the same ideas about post-service, and specifically what me and Madden connected on was the fact that I was adamant about being a veteran and not a victim, that throughout the, like at that point, like a year and a half, I guess, of medical treatment, I've seen a lot of veterans get into a comfort area with being a professional patient, because whether it's intentional or not, the DOD, the VA, all that stuff is unfortunately set up to almost kind of reward that. It's like, hey man, you're a wounded warrior. Like, you're good, man. Like, let's help you. You're gonna medically retire. Like, you're good. Like, here's your VA disability, like all this shit. And that's fine, but the thing that like gives me the shivers every time is when I meet a new veteran and the first, how they introduce themselves to me
is their disability rating.
Is their disability rating.
It drives me insane.
It's like, hey man, I'm a 50% disabled vet. And I'm like, hey, I'm Dan.
Yeah.
You know, like I don't ever want to be that. And I'm not saying they're bad people at all, but what I like want to like scream at them is like, that's not who
their
you
identity.
Are.
Yeah,
that's not who you are.
Yeah.
And because, you know, shit, there's guys like Dan Magida, I think he's like rated at 30% or whatever. But by the way, he's a full-time Boise SWAT cop. He has like, he sets off metal detectors because he's got shrapnel on his like body from Iraq, and he never ever talks about it. And it's not saying like, oh, we should go back to that mentality where it's cool to be the guy that's like, yeah, my dad was in Vietnam, but he never talked about it, so he must be like some crazy war vet dude. There's a balance.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a balance between like, that is my identity, or it was my identity, as a Marine, as a soldier, as an airman, whatever, as a sailor, and I'm not that anymore, but I'm still me. And like, you know, the whole identity, actions, and feelings kind of triangle, to me, like, I struggled greatly. I still struggle with the loss of my identity because I was a guy that identified with my work. And for better or for worse, it served me really well in my adult life until it didn't.
Well, so many of us do. Like the military provides you, if it's one thing, it's a really strong identity. And we all share that. And when it's stripped away, I think the majority of us feel that void in our lives. And you have to take the time to reflect on, who am I today? And what am I going to do in the future with my life? And how do I become the person I really want to be in the future? And respect your time in the military, respect the lessons learned, respect those friends and you know, the people that wore the cloth of the nation that served alongside you. That time is just amazing in how it shapes us and forms us, but it gives us the tools and the ability to go forward in life and do great things. And that's what I think everyone needs to capitalize. It's not, hey, I'm Brian, I'm 50% disabled veteran. It's, hey, I'm Brian, I live in Boise, Idaho, I do this with my life, I'm a dad of 3 kids, I coach Little League baseball, and oh, by the way, I volunteer for this nonprofit, and I'm kicking ass in my profession, and I'm moving forward in life.
Exactly, and I think that like of that triangle, the identity, actions, and emotions, like the only recommendation I can make to other veterans is when you lose that identity, you're struggling with the question of the new identity, or some sort of combination of you, old you and the new
Yeah,
you,
right.
is to let that set aside for a second and focus on the actions. Like feelings, like fuck your feelings. Like really,
right.
like that is the least important part of that equation.
It's what are you doing?
Yeah, just like everyone's like, well, you can't really fake it till you make it forever. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I think you can. Maybe not forever, but you can fake it long enough to where you start to gain some new identity or past identity back.
Yeah, right.
Just act like you know you're supposed to. Like take the actions, get involved in whatever it is, whether or not you want to, whatever or not you're feeling, whether it's physical pain, emotional pain, set that aside and focus on your actions, and the other stuff is going to start to come back.
So, from that point we met you at that happy hour, what we've seen in you is what I call post-traumatic growth, like tremendous growth. Your HBOT treatments, you came back from that a different person.
Yeah.
Like we could see immediately.
Yeah.
I remember when Matt and I talked about it, we were like, holy shit, man. Dan's cognitive processing is really good. Like that therapy, there's something to that, and there's
My
no
dog's just
doubt.
gonna shake over
Yeah,
you.
we got Aldo right here.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, he's the most beautiful dog.
Full name is Lieutenant Colonel Aldo Rain, but that's okay.
Yeah.
He accepts just Aldo
Well,
on
we,
occasion.
we love Aldo here in the podcast studio with us.
He's going to rank check you just like the dude did on TV the other day too.
It's good.
Lieutenant Colonel Aldo to you. No, I'm just kidding.
So,
yeah, I don't know, man. That's the part where I'm still kind of like, I really appreciate when people say like, hey man, I've seen like the growth and the improvement in you.
yeah,
For me, I feel it's kind of uncomfortable position now because it's like, hey man, I'm being like asked by other veterans. I'm like, hey man, like I need some help. Like, what did you do? And a big part of me, the first instinct is like, I'm still doing it. Like, it's
You're
not
living it every day.
It's not over. Like
Yeah.
I'm still working on it.
Yep.
And
I think that's an important lesson for
Yeah.
everybody, though. We're always working on it.
Yeah.
So that never stops.
Yeah.
We're always transforming, learning, and growing. And you may need treatments for certain things that you're dealing with based on your injuries, but you're seeking that help, you're finding that help, you're finding the right treatment modalities, and you're doing the best you can to get to a better state of who you want to be.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the willingness to get out of your comfort zone and framing it in the same ways that I framed the rest of my adult life, where it's like, I was always the guy that, like I said, like liked training. I liked practice. I didn't
Right.
just like to hit. I liked to be hit. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I liked early morning PTs. I liked long FTXs. I liked difficult deployments, challenging deployments in austere environments. That shit was my jam. So now I don't have that opportunity anymore. Like no one's paying me to go to weird places and try to figure stuff out at that level, or engage in like direct combat at that level at all. So what's the substitute for that? Like everyone is seeking like, because the easy answer was like, oh, you're an adrenaline junkie because that was your thing, like airborne operations, combat, stuff like that. Like that's your thing. It's a lot more than that. It's a lot deeper than that. And to me, if I could sum it up in a couple things, well, one would certainly be leadership, because I'm not just saying like the status of being a leader, but having someone depend on you is way easier for me than being on my own. Like I found that when I'm isolated, when I'm on my own, I'm a shitty person, because it's hard now to justify like the things before, like back in the day. It's like, why am I maintaining this high level of physical fitness? Well, because my team literally depends
on
that.
your ability, your
Yes.
stamina.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like if I'm not capable of performing at this physical level, then I have the potential to be the cause to harm for my teammates.
Yep.
And now it's like, oh, like I get it. I see like like the overweight veterans that have just settled into that, for instance. And I mean, shit, I'm overweight right now. And I'm like, I'm just waking up from this process of being like, well, sitting on my ass for 2 years and being like, well, poor me, I have a lot of physical pain, I don't sleep, like all these things, like, well, I'm not gonna work out because what's the fucking point? Because no one's depending on me anymore. Like, yeah, I have 2 kids that I absolutely love.
Yeah.
I have my wife that I absolutely love.
They're depending on you.
They are, but they're not really depending on my peak
Not your
level
stamina.
performance.
No,
You know
they
what I
want
mean?
you to be present in their lives.
Right.
In a holistic way where they're getting your clarity of mind,
Yep.
your ability to read stories to your boys, all those things that you struggled with,
Yeah.
you know, where you couldn't focus on the words in a book for a 1-year-old.
Yeah.
You know, so, but now you're there.
Yeah, and beyond that too, I think it's like the emotional availability, because as much as I really still struggle to even like say the letters PTSD. Yeah. It's just like a personal hang up of mine. But the fact is that whatever emotional trauma that people are carrying, it leads to that distance. And it's a really horrible feeling to kind of like wake up from this for me, and to realize like I've never, like since the injury, even though I've been so lucky to like have my sons on my lap, to do these things with my sons, to have them like snuggling with me on the couch, watching a kid's movie or whatever it is, or reading them stories at night. Like I haven't had the emotional real estate or cognitive real estate or whatever you want to call it to be like, I'm thankful for this. And a lot of that I think is kind of that guilt and shame cycle that guys get into, because I mean, like I said before, telling this story, like the facts are the facts. Like it was my responsibility and this catastrophic event happened.
Yeah.
And that's a lot to carry, and I'm not willing to give that up because it is my responsibility. That being said, I don't want to have my sons suffer like their whole lives with a dad that can't appreciate being around them, because I'm so dedicated to, you know, carrying this burden, if that makes sense.
Well, you found a great outlet for some of that burden in your Aaron Butler Memorial Purple Heart Run. That you and a partner co-founded this run, and now it's blown into a foundation in Aaron Butler's name, and you're moving forward with the foundation and the activities in honor of him. And to me, that's a tremendously positive outlet of all that you've carried, all that's transpired in your personal life since what happened in 2017 in the Pekka Valley in Afghanistan, and you're channeling it in positive ways. So what was the impetus for creating the Staff Sergeant Aaron Butler Memorial Purple Heart Run?
The 1 year anniversary, so August 16th, 2018, some of the team guys came up here around the anniversary and on the anniversary, and you know, like we traveled around all these bars and we printed out these little cards that said like, hey, free beer, like no gimmick. It had a picture of Butler and like a description of him, and say like, hey, like whoever finds this, like drink this beer, but just do us a favor and toast to Aaron, because he was a dude that was a remarkable dude, and not just soldier, he was a remarkable person. And you know, so proceeding to get shit-faced for like 48 hours straight, and occasionally breaking into like crying fest, laughing fest about stupid stuff that happened, ridiculous stories about Aaron, ridiculous stories about other guys. I kind of felt like at the end of that, I was like, man, that's not gonna cut it. It's not gonna cut honoring the memory of Butler by doing this every year, because I mean, half of us are also doing that on nights that are not the anniversary nights, right?
Right.
And you know, in this job, like your calendar fills up quite a bit with these anniversaries of your friends that have been lost. And it's like, how often are you going to do that, and how productive is that? That like every once or twice a month or every other month, you're having like a drink fest day because of another fallen comrade. I don't want to settle into that. So we decided Aaron was like this huge physical, well, not huge, he was short, but he was a physical beast. Like his presence, his aura, whatever you want to call it, like he was a giant. And 4-time state wrestling champion in Utah, which is not a small feat. There's only been 12 of those in history. And just like on the team, a group of like meat eaters, he made us all look like vegans. Like he was just like legit, just that guy. Like in combat, out of combat, he was like the man. And there's always that minority of guys, even in populations like MARSOC, SF, whatever. Pick one that's high testosterone. There's always like this separate group that are just
the super high performer.
Just a bit more.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to create an event that was going to physically challenge people, and we settled on our first year being a trail 10K and 5K run in Eagle, Idaho, and utilizing Idaho and the great like terrain that we have here and the great support networks that we had here. We, contacted local groups and we're like, hey, we're doing this first year run, It's all the money that we make from it is going to the local order of the Military Order of the Purple Heart. You know, and we were looking for some guidance, and they're like, oh, well, like for a first year 5K and 10K, like let's hope for 100 participants, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, we're gonna target 300. Like 300 is our goal. And then getting other people on board, like 1890 Productions, help from Mission43, and then just like guerrilla marketing that we were just like doing on our own, making silly videos and like trying to show what veterans actually are. And we're not claiming to have the hallmark on what a veteran is at all. But at the same time, we decided to make a concerted effort through the Aaron Butler Memorial Purple Heart Run to close the gap, knowledge gap or emotional gap, whatever you want to call it, between the civilian populace and this minority of warfighters that we have developed over 18 years of war in the global war on terror, where there is still a small population of people serving, period, let alone guys that now have 5, 10, 15 deployments. Those guys and those families are drifting really far away from the public consciousness. And the public is not as involved as they were in past wars.
Right.
So there's things that like we wanted to set up through that race and make it more than a run, you know? It's more than a run, it's an emotional, educational event.
Right.
That's like one of our marketing slogans.
And it brings community together.
Yeah. And we ended up having to cap registration at 800 registered participants because our infrastructure was not set up even for that much. We screwed up all kinds of things in our first year. I think some people ran like 15K, like some dude I think is still out there. We got to look for that guy, but.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of manning the turnaround point for the 10K. And I remember people wandering through going, man, where is the finish line? Like what route am I on?
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? All you got to do is turn around here and just head back to the start and you'll be fine. So people took it well. Like, who cares how many miles? If you put in extra, good on you, right? What happened and what transpired that day was community came together in honor of Staff Sergeant Aaron Butler, but so much more than that.
Yeah.
There were people from your team. There were people that came from like 7 different states to participate in this event.
Yep.
So I think you accomplished your goal, whether or not mistakes were made. There are always mistakes in those kinds of events. It was an impactful day for so many people and so appreciated by people from so many different backgrounds that can't wait for the next Aaron Butler run or whatever your foundation gets involved in. They're looking for it because you had an impact on people.
We haven't actually even unveiled the Aaron Butler Memorial Foundation quite yet, but it's really simple, 3 pillars. Pillar number 1, social action events, specifically Aaron Butler Purple Heart runs. Pillar number 2 is youth wrestling development, so high school and younger.
Yeah, in honor of Aaron.
Yeah, dude, all the Butler family, because all his brothers and everything, they're huge into wrestling, right? And Aaron specifically, but all those dudes are just like great wrestlers, and unfortunately it's one of those sports that's really struggling.
Yeah.
Really disappointed that Boise State got rid of their Pac-10 or Pac-12 wrestling program. And meanwhile, like wrestling is one of the greatest sports out there for developing young men and women of character. You know what I mean? So we want to put an emphasis on that. And the third pillar is case management, which is very similar to one of the things we're working on in Mission43 Inc. right now. But helping veterans and families of veterans navigate the ridiculous process of finding the right care for them. Because it's not a lack of, there's no lack of like nonprofit organizations that want to help veterans.
No, they're out there in
They're
droves.
everywhere.
Yeah.
But honestly, and it's going to sound really arrogant, but I honestly think that a lot of those organizations don't know what to do.
Yeah.
They're like, hey man, you're struggling with TBI, you're struggling with PTSD, you're struggling with substance use disorder. We can send you anywhere you want to go, but that's not what the dudes and women that really need help need. They need a Casey.
Yeah.
They need Casey to be like, this is what you need, and I'm scheduling it for you, and this
It's
is
all
what you're
lined
going
out
to do.
for you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like, take off time work or whatever you're doing, and get into this first step and get a little bit of white space.
Well, that's a great segue into your new role here at Mission43. You've just come on board within the last couple weeks to help us not only carry forward our 43 Inc. with our social engagement with our membership base, but to now add a new health and wellness program that really focuses on these types of meaningful treatment whether it's TBI, PTS related, or substance use disorder that we know so many people that come from a military background struggle with. When they leave service and lose their identity, they try to overcome it and self-medicate.
Yep. All those things are interrelated. You know, like the things you just mentioned, like TBI, PTSD, and substance use disorder. It's really hard to delineate what symptoms are coming from what, because they all prop each other up and in a weird negative way support each other. Yeah. So the new program that we're unveiling under Inc. is called Operation Resilient Path, or ORP. And some folks in the military may know that ORP is an acronym we use for Objective Rally Point. Basically, it's the point where you launch into an assault or raid or whatever it is you're doing, kinetic action, and it's the point that you return to afterwards. So that's what we're trying to do for Idaho veterans. We haven't officially rolled it out yet, but by the first of the year, as you know, it should be rolled out. And we're targeting the most critically in need veterans. We're not offering all the services just like a new brand of services that already exist. Like, we're not offering help with chronic pain, or we're not offering a surgeon. We're not going to diagnose anyone. We're not going to treat anyone here. But what we are doing through the benevolence of the J.A. and Catherine Albertson Family Foundation and Mission43 is to be able to fund people to go to some of the premier programs in the country. We'll be able to fund people that need it and can be served well by it, that are suffering from either TBI, PTSD, or substance use disorder, or any combination of those,
right,
to go to hyperbaric treatment. Whether it's in Idaho or not, we're going to fund them to go to the Marcus Institute in Denver, Colorado, if they're suffering from TBI-related injuries. And there's some other partner programs, like the Warriors Heart in Texas, that we hope to partner with to send people there, because it's like the premier substance use disorder and PTSD facility. So we have that ability, we're going to use that ability, and it's critical for me to be a caretaker of this program. And in that, it is going to be a pretty serious vetting process.
Absolutely, yeah.
And what I really don't want is for veterans to hear this and be like, well, I'm not a combat veteran, so my problems are not going to be, I'm not going to be accepted into that program because I'm not a combat veteran. Or maybe it's because I have a bad conduct discharge, right, you know what I mean? Or whatever it is that would keep them out of treatment facilities like the VAs, for instance. Like, if you don't have, if you have a bad conduct or dishonorable discharge, you're not getting those benefits there.
Right, yeah. We're not going to care about your characterization of service.
Right.
If you served and you have a need and you've gone through this rigorous vetting process, we're going to find the right resourcing for you.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm not saying we're targeting people that can deliberately made the bad choices and got kicked out of the military. What I'm saying is we're going to look at the whole person concept.
Right.
So just like me and my formative failure as an 18-year-old, I think we owe it to the veterans of Idaho to look at their service as a whole and say, hey, you were a remarkable Marine, soldier, sailor, whatever it is, until you had this, let's say, traumatic event or injury in combat or whatever it is, or MST or whatever it is, and then all of a sudden you had this catastrophic loss of performance, and then you get shuffled off the military and thrown back into society. That, there's a large demographic that's like that.
Oh, absolutely. They're out there for sure.
Yeah, and unfortunately the military does a really poor job of considering that whole person concept. And sometimes, yeah, they have to make the decision hey dude, you're cut, you're off the team,
yeah.
Get
the military
out.
is a moving machine, always moving forward.
Right.
And if you're slowing them down in any way, they're really good at processing you out, removing you from the equation, so they're always moving forward.
But what happens to those women and men that are in that situation then? Then they stagnate, and that's a lot of where the most serious and critical cases are. So for the ORP program, we are going to have on the Mission43 website the button to click, and you can learn a lot more about it, and we hope people do. But beyond that, it's going to say hey, are you or your husband or your wife or someone you know struggling with effects of TBI? Are you suffering from PTSD? Are you suffering from substance use disorders, or any combination of that? Click here, fill this out, provide us the base information that we need, because we are willing to see if you're right for us and if we're right for you.
Yeah.
And if both of those things jive, we are going to pay for world-class treatment of you, and you're not going to be given up on.
Well, Dan, I can't wait to see where you take this program, and I look forward to working with you on this program and bringing it to certain people in need that we'll uncover in this process as we unveil it as a 2020 Mission 43 and 43 Inc. initiative here. It's been a pleasure, man, sitting down with you and learning about your story in great detail. And I can't tell you how grateful we are that you are on the team. You have a tremendous story now of what right looks like, because you've lived through all of that. You still do every day. You suffer the effects of TBI, PTS, and substance use disorder. You've walked in the shoes of everyone that has some form or those interrelated issues. You've been that guy. So you're the guy to lead this program forward. You're the guy to help us build it out. And we're ecstatic to have you on the team, man. It's so good to see you where you are today. It's always great to see you, Casey, and your boys together and enjoying life as a family unit, man. The videos you post of your dad perspective of your kids could be some of the funniest things I've ever seen. So to the listeners out there, you got to find Dan's videos on Facebook about dad perspective.
There's a lot of awesome hardcore male nudity. I don't know. And yeah, farts are funny, things are funny, stuff like that.
Hilarious, man. Well, again, welcome to the Mission 43 team in an official capacity. We can't wait to see what you do. And I do have to pay a quick shout out to our sponsor of this podcast.
Hell yeah.
They make it all possible at Spy Optics. So Standard Issue is their military brand, and I've become a huge fan. I've worn lots of glasses from other reputable companies that most veterans wear. And I got to say that the Spies have become truly my favorite brand of sunglasses. So we're grateful to have them as a sponsor of the podcast, the Mission 43 podcast. We look forward to carrying that relationship forward. We look forward to everything you're going to do here, and we look forward to continuing to lead, learn, and inspire in our Mission 43 communities, and more importantly, empowering our Mission 43 members to go out and lead, learn, and inspire in our communities. So until next time, take care and get out there and get after it. Thanks for listening to the Mission 43 podcast. To learn more, go to mission43.org.